My name is Paul Rigney. Nice to be with you today, Mike.
Uh-huh. And what organization do you represent, Paul?
I am the Executive Director for Registrant Travel Action Group.
And what is that?
We are affiliated with RSOL and other organizations focused on human rights, particularly for registrants. My concern and my organization's concern is that we work to help registrants and their families travel internationally safely in accordance with problems that we've been having with the current Angel Watch regimen and laws that the United States has passed and executed that are limiting the ability of registrants and their travel and their families to travel internationally.
Okay, I'm going to take you back just a little bit here, Paul, because I'm not sure all of our audience will actually know anything about RSOL or anything like that. So basically, you work with people that have been, or work with laws surrounding people that have been convicted of a sex offense.
Correct.
Okay, and what laws recently have been passed that you're particularly concerned with?
Sure, there's a law that was passed. It's called HR 515 out of Congress, presented by Representative Smith from New Jersey, and it's called International Megan's Law, and specifically it requires notification sent to foreign countries of registrants, or what the public understands as sex offenders, who may travel internationally for business or pleasure with their families, and alerts are sent to those countries, notifying those countries of that individual's travel plans and their intent to potentially commit a sex act against a child. Also, the law is pushing for a unique identifier to be on the passports of registered citizens. And this unique identifier will identify them as sex offenders. And this unique identifier will put individual registrants and their families at risk as they enter foreign countries and put them at physical risk. So we're trying to get the law. We have a lawsuit right now against the law, and my objective of my organization is to inform registrants of what they can expect as they travel, so they're prepared for if they do get kicked out, that they have to change their travel plans, or just understand where they can travel safely and freely without being molested or circumvented by our own laws.
Well, I guess I suppose many people that are listening to this are saying, well, so what's the big deal? Isn't it good to keep sex offenders from traveling and committing crimes in other countries? Or
Sure, that's a fair question. And I think the objective of the bill, as stated in the bill, are good. We need to pass laws and have coordination between international organizations that will identify people traveling for the purpose of child exploitation and interdict them, arrest them, and put them in prison. The problem is this law doesn't do that in any respect, because what is happening is there are registered citizens, or people known as sex offenders, who have already done their time. They're upright citizens who are trying to have normal lives and travel with their families, much for business or pleasure, just like anyone else. And they're simply trying to get on with their life. And their travel plans are completely legitimate. And what's interesting about the law as it's applied currently under what's called the Angel Watch process, they're not looking at the individuals to make any prediction of whether they're going to commit a crime or not. The very fact that they're on the registry is enough for them to send a message. Now, originally when the law was passed, this Angel Watch program was intended to be a intelligence gathering device that would allow the government to predict travel patterns and determine whether there was a chance of someone committing an act or a crime against a child, and then try to interdict that individual as they travel. But instead, all they're simply doing is sending messages based upon a registered status as a sex offender. The problem with that process is you've got people that are on the registry for Romeo and Juliet crimes, people who did simple things maybe 30, 40 years ago.
what's Romeo and Juliet?
Someone who was perhaps 20, and had sex with someone who was 16 under the age of consent, consensual. I had one man who is now in his late 40s, and his wife was his victim. He was 20, she was 15. He was convicted of a Romeo and Juliet offense in California. He's now a registrant on the California registry, but he owns his own business. His kids are in their 20s. His wife and him and family members traveled to Mexico on a planned vacation. He was kicked out of Mexico, forced to come back, destroyed his entire vacation, all because he's required to be on the California registry. Now the problem with this law is, first of all, it destroys the legitimate travel of family members and registrants, but also diverts resources away from the efforts of the U.S. government to work with local governments and local agencies to interdict child exploitation. Resources are taken away from that effort and put in the effort simply to track and report the legitimate travels of registrants. Furthermore, as a registrant who travels internationally, you're required to report that to your local agency, which is recorded. They inform the Marshal Service. So the United States government already understands that you're traveling as you're a registrant and you're traveling internationally. They have your entire itinerary. When you come back in the country, you're given extra scrutiny, and they always go through your bags, they go through your computers, seeing what your activities were. So the U.S. government already has a means to monitor these individuals as they travel, and if there's any suspicion of activity, they can always take action upon that. Just the simple sending out messages willy-nilly is doing nothing but destroying people's lives and doing nothing to affect the exploitation of children.
So they don't need this law to effectively accomplish the purpose that they've stated?
No, they have the law because they're lazy. The hardest work of affecting child exploitation overseas is investigating work, having boots on the ground, and we've been effective through law enforcement by working with local governments, local NGOs, to identify Americans and other Europeans and other people who travel for that purpose, and then working with those agencies on the ground in Thailand, Cambodia, Philippines, and other locations to stop them as they arrive, and whether they're registrants or not. And most of the exploitation, I don't have the numbers with me, but of all the exploitation that's occurring, it's just normal citizens who have never been caught for any crime, who eventually, if they ever get caught, are caught for the first time. It's not sex offenders who are classified as sex offenders traveling for those purposes.
So really the law is targeting the wrong people?
Yeah, of course, absolutely. If you're a registrant and you're traveling for that purpose, you're going to be caught because you're watched, you're monitored, and you're scrutinized. This is a useless law which is diverting resources away from where it needs to be.
So,
and that puts children at risk.
So you told some stories, I believe, earlier at the conference that we're at today.
Sure.
About some of the effects on people that have legitimate travel, people that have been going in and out of countries for years, perhaps, and own property there. Could you expand on that?
Sure. There was one gentleman who no longer registered, lived in China, had a business in China, and he lived there for 8 years, and the United States sent an alert to China saying that this person's in that country to commit crimes. So China deported him. And he had business interests there. There was a couple who was in Dominican Republic to go scuba diving. They were separated. He was sent back home, and all the valuables went through by immigration. The valuables were stolen, and she was left in that country alone with no passport, no money, nothing. And the immigration in the Dominican Republic simply said, well, your country told our country that your boyfriend was going to commit a heinous crime here, so we sent him home. And the local immigration officers used the opportunity to steal her money. So that's a direct effect that this law has had, an Angel Watch, on damaging an innocent American citizen simply trying to travel overseas. And what's really chilling about the unique identifier that they want to put on our passports is, as that's displayed overseas at a hotel, that puts us and our families at physical risk of harm. And that's a very, very dangerous situation.
Well, this unique identifier that you're talking about, is there any precedent legally for Having done this over the years to any other group of people, or?
None in the United States. The Nazis did it to Jews in the 1930s, and the Soviet Union did it to dissidents of their own country back in the 1960s and 70s.
So we're implementing a law in the United States that basically led to the Holocaust.
Yeah, it was certainly a contributing element. It was used by the Nazis to separate Jews from the rest of the population and to continually exploit them and to deprive them of their rights. So this is really a fascist symbol on our passports. And what's also very interesting is we need to understand what governments do. When governments have the opportunity to take away our rights in one area, they're going to exploit it for other reasons. What if down the road they decide that we're going to put a symbol on the passports of people of the Islamic faith, for example? Once that inroad's provided, then the governments all over the world always take the next step. That's why we have the Bill of Rights. And that's a chilling effect. And I assure you, just like with the RICO laws, government agencies will use this opportunity to try to grab more rights from us and to get more power.
So you really feel this thing could roll out into other
Sure, of course.
groups, other
Sure.
populations?
Look at the Patriot Act and the NDAA. The U.S. government will continue to grab onto more power. And this symbol, which will not protect anyone, is a very chilling effect on not just our rights as registrants and families, but every American citizen should be very concerned about this trend.
So how are other governments reacting to this identifier or this proposed legislation?
Right. Some governments think it's overreach and they're not particularly concerned. Other governments, though, have told us, and we have documentation on it, that they view it as an alert from the U.S. government that these individuals are traveling to commit a crime. And they view it as a message from the United States to send these individuals home. And they're treating it like you're on the terrorist watch list, or you're being identified as a terrorist or a drug dealer. And they've told us directly that they believe, where before, without the alerts, they understood that a person might have had a criminal background, but they were still let in the country. The alerts being treated by those countries as a message the United States is sending to forcibly send us home. And we've been told that directly by immigration officers. They said, we're not telling you that you can't come to the country. We're being directed by your government to send you home. And that's, of course, not a very chilling effect.
And this is, of course, in many cases, years after people have committed their offense?
Oh, we're talking 30, 40, 50 years, 4 decades, 5 decades.
After
Sure.
somebody's committed an offense?
Yeah, because for example, in California, if you committed a misdemeanor when you were 15 years old, just example, maybe public urination, you're on the registry in California for the rest of your life. Yeah, you might travel, you might be 50, you're a business owner, and you may not even be on the public registry because you're low level, but you're on the database, the U.S. government database. They send a message to Mexico. Mexico kicks that individual out, and the family's completely unprepared. Vacation is completely destroyed, and this guy was convicted of public urination at the age of 15, or streaking, for example. Back in the late 70s. So and the other problem with this law is it was initially proposed back around 2008 to look at the individual and where they were traveling and make an assessment of what the potential this individual might do, and then send that message to the government. If it was narrowed down to that, I think there'd be less argument on our side. But that's not the effort at all. If you are on any registry anywhere in the world, or any U.S. jurisdiction, then the U.S. government, the Angel Watch program, will send the alert. You'll have the stamp on your passport, and you have no redress. You have no recourse to try to explain, look, I've been a citizen for 30 years, I'm married, my kids are in college, I did that when I was 18 years old. You have no redress. The U.S. government simply sends it. We're fighting that with a lawsuit and an injunction, but at the moment, that's the situation. And there's no effort on the U.S. government to kind of assess what your real motivations are. So to me, that's just simply lazy policing. You can send a message, that's simple.
Yeah, and this could happen to somebody that was convicted as a kid.
Sure,
So-
of course, of course.
And
And your record's expunged. You may technically, depending on the law of the state, it may be off your record, but you're still in a national database, and they're going to send the alert, and that's the way the law's written.
so if I understand you correctly, then this notice is sent out to these foreign countries. I mean, if I make travel plans, doesn't the government inform me that
No,
they sent this notice out?
You're not informed at all. There was a version of the bill that was written around 2010 that never made it to the floor, and written in there was the Angel Watch Office was to make honest efforts to try to contact you either by text, email, or phone. But that was taken out of this bill, so they're not required to tell us at all.
Okay, and this is if you've ever committed a crime, you're not necessarily on the registry anymore?
No, if you've committed any offense, misdemeanor or not, at any point in your life, and you're on the national database that's kept by the FBI, you can be off a registry, and you can even have what's called a letter of rehabilitation in your state. California has one, where they said your conviction's completely gone. The U.S. government will still send that message. You could have been a clean, honest, law-abiding person for 50, 60 years. You could be 75 years old. They're still going to send the alert. Now, if they looked at someone who was convicted of a predatory offense against a child, but there's no effort there. They didn't separate it by crime or conviction or intent of the individual. It's just simply all registrants, they send a message.
So tell me a little bit about resources that your organization has for anybody that's interested.
Yeah, I built a website. It's called registranttag.org. And we've developed a matrix in which we've showed the countries that have turned your way, so people can hopefully plan some vacations. We are also making efforts to support the lawsuit effort to have the law either overturned or injuncted. I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not dealing with that. So we collect resources for that. And then the other thing is, I've got a team of people. We're going to be going to Congress. I've collected stories, hundreds of stories of family members who have traveled, had their vacation plans destroyed. Some people have been threatened by immigration officers overseas. I have that data. I'm going to be presenting it to individual congressional staffers and even Congress people, if I can meet with, to explain to them that your law that you passed is endangering American citizens as they travel. I've already done that and got no response. The response I got back very chillingly was that the Congress people didn't care, that they passed a law that threatens the lives of American citizens as they travel. But I've got now the data and specific examples, and I'm going to be presenting that to Congress, me and a couple people that work on my board.
What's the website?
It's registranttag.org. So the word registranttag.org.
And can you, what do you know anything about the statistics or anything? What are they basing this law on?
Yeah, that's good. The other thing is we're doing some research, and I have some preliminary numbers. For example, the original bill talked about every year there's millions and millions of children being exploited. And then it states in one particular year, 4,300 registrants applied for passports. Well, we have to remember that's out of 800,000 registrants. If you run the numbers, in reality, at a rate of the number of adults who apply for passports, registrants apply for passports at 10% the rate of the normal American population. However, Chris Smith, Representative Smith, used that number to say, oh my God, 4,300 predators have applied for passports. What's interesting about that, the State Department came out with a public statement saying that they have no records at all that any single registrant applied for a passport for the purpose of going overseas to commit an act. And I have a Freedom of Information Act from the Justice Department asking them, of all those people who have been prosecuted for international child exploitation, how much are registrants? I don't have the data yet, but they haven't given me one example of any of these 4,300 people that they have any charges against any of these individuals. However, since the early 200s, 2001, 2002, there have been literally about 60 or 70 cases. And they haven't given me one in which they can identify a registrant who would be affected by this law that committed an act against a child. So there's no data at all that this actual law will do anything to interdict Americans traveling to go overseas. Furthermore, we do know that only 10% of sexual crime are ever reported, and and you can run the numbers. I'll have that on my website soon. Of the offenders who are now registered, there's another estimated 5 to 6 million other individuals who have committed sex crimes who are not on the registry, and probably 2 to 3 million of them have passports, which means they can travel freely. And of those numbers who are traveling overseas to exploit children, they're not going to be affected by this law, and resources are going to be diverted from being able to interdict them and to find them and to prosecute them. So this law is going to be very counterproductive.
And there's no like countermeasure from other countries that is the equivalent of this kind of law, where other countries are monitoring their offenders?
No.
The U.S.
No, none. I have anecdotal information from other countries that they think we're insane. They think we're absolutely insane. We already know. I think everyone who is educated understands that the registries themselves are a waste of time, a waste of money, do nothing for public secure safety. Secondly, we understand that now they put everyone on the registry. And I talked to a psychiatrist friend of mine who's been an expert in sex crimes for 40, 50 years. The way the current laws are written, he said 95% of American adults, male adults, have done something in the past that would put them on the registry. So the registry as a tool for public safety is completely, utterly useless. As a tool to predict behavior and recidivism, it's useless and worthless. And unfortunately, you have a lot of men and women who now are trying to get back on their feet, have a normal life, and this is just one other form of punishment and scrutiny that is destroying not just their own lives, but their personal lives. A good example is myself. I traveled to Ireland with my 84-year-old mother. My mother told me she wanted to go to Ireland. I love my mother. So we made trips to go to Ireland. Well, the United States started implementing the Angel Watch program. I was able to get to Ireland with my mother, and we had a great time. And she came home, I went home, and we just did great stuff. I drank lots of Jameson, lots of beer, had a great time. But I was shaking my boots. What would happen if I had to go home and my 84-year-old mother is left there? Well, the chilling part of this whole thing is when I brought that up to congressional staffers as a consequence of the law, I just got blank stares. Basically, the sense I got was they don't care. They don't care about the destroyed vacations. They don't care about the girlfriend who has her valuables stolen, taken advantage of by unscrupulous immigration officers. We understand in third world countries, there's a lot of immigration officers and a lot of government officials who are corrupt. And they're going to use this law to take advantage to put American citizens at risk. And remember, most registrants have families, have wives, have children. And another good example is a woman who is in California, was a teacher, had sex with a 16-year-old. She shouldn't have. She committed a crime, but it was some 20 years ago. And she was kicked off her cruise, and she can't go on any cruises again because she's a registered sex offender. I mean, what's she going to do? Was she going to go on the cruise with her husband while her husband's off with the kids, grab a 15-year-old boy and sneak into the stateroom? I mean, come on, this is crazy. This is insane. This bill's insane. The unique identifier is dangerous, and it's a very, very bad situation for American citizens.
Well, speaking to the insanity of the bill, didn't you say that they used some kind of special rules or something when they passed this? Can you speak about the process?
Yeah, sure. I'm not a legislative expert, but they did what's called suspend the rules. When the bill was brought up to Congress for a vote after it got through committee, they authorized it to be passed just by a voice vote, which means no one's vote is recorded, and it's not allowed for any debate. And the assumption is that bills which are non-controversial can be brought up under suspension of the rules, and this was. Well, when we went to Congress, I met with about 30 different staff members to make it an obvious statement that for the first time a unique identifier on a passport that's been associated in the past by fascist regimes, that's something which should at least be debated in Congress. And again, I got in front of the Judiciary Committee, some staffers there. I got that information in front of them, but that rule wasn't changed. And then we had a lot of our members. We had an online poll that was signed by about 3,000 just individuals from around the country, them saying that this is a controversial bill, it's a dangerous bill, it should be debated, and there was no effort to make a debate. So I think that's interesting. It's unfortunate. I'm not sure what recourse. What's really chilling is to understand that Congress can do that. The Speaker of the House can do that, and we have no recourse for pushback. I did get word from two different staffers that their particular congressmen, I don't have their names available, that they didn't have a chance to read the bill. When they read the unique identifier, they gave pushback after the vote had already been made, and they had wished they had gotten that information in front of them before. Then they would at least I'm told, consider pushing for debate in front of Congress.
So Congress violated their own rules?
I don't know. I'm not a legislative aide or expert. I understand they did. But again, what is non-controversial? That's subjective. So they could argue that from their viewpoint it wasn't controversial. But I think that's prima facie common sense. I think that a unique identifier on a passport for the first time in U.S. history should raise some eyebrows and some concern.
I mean, you talked about how children are not really being protected by this bill, but are there any children of registrants that have been affected?
Yes, I had an example of a husband and wife and their young children. They were, I think, 4 and 5 years old. They went to a trip to Cancun. The wife, whose offense was 20 years old, was deported, and the husband was stuck there with 2 young children. The entire vacation destroyed. And there are literally dozens of examples of couples, families on trips where the loved one is ejected and the wife and children are left in the country. For mostly what happens is the couple and the family will scramble to get airline tickets to come home. And in one example, the family was able to get home. The husband stayed there for another 24 hours, sequestered in immigration, and then he was finally able to get a flight home.
And you were talking about some people that have spouses in other countries.
Yeah, there's another aspect. This is indirectly related to this law. There was a gentleman who was off the registry in a state. He was living in the Philippines and traveling back and forth. He owned a business there, had been married to his spouse, his wife. They have children, and he lived in the Philippines for 10 years. And the United States sent an alert to Philippine immigration that he is an offender. He's living in Philippines with the intent to commit an act against a child, and the Philippine government arrested him and deported him. Well, he was able to get back in the Philippines, and now he's back living with his spouse and his children. And he was able to he was blacklisted by the Filipino government, and he was able to get off the blacklist and be able to get his visa back to live in the Philippines. But when he travels to the Philippines, the United States government still sends an alert. He's off the registry. He had, again, what was called a Romeo and Juliet offense back some 30 years ago. But the United States government will still send an alert.
All precipitated by the original letter with no criteria.
Correct. No indication of risk level, no due process, no warning to the individual. People have lived in China for years and been kicked out. Sometimes they're able to get back in the country, sometimes they're not. For a friend of mine who lives, I won't tell you where he lives currently, but he'd been living in Nicaragua with his wife for 12 years, with a house and a business. He was deported. So now he's trying to work with a lawyer to get back in. And again, he was established Nicaraguan residency They knew what his criminal background was. He was granted resident status in Nicaragua. The U.S. government sent an alert to Nicaragua identifying him as a predator who is there to commit a crime, and based upon that that alert, Nicaragua sent him home. After already vetting him, having gone through the immigration process, and he already had established residency. Now he's probably going to be able to go back, but he's going to spend thousands of dollars. His family's stuck there. He could lose his business. That affects his children's welfare. And these stories go on. I've got dozens of these stories of spouses, people. A gentleman here in the United States, married to his wife who lives here for the last 10 years. He's trying to get a green card for his wife, but now with International Megan's Law that was passed, immigration is giving her a hard time because he's an ex-registrant. His crime has been expunged. It happened some 25, 30 years ago, and he's a law-abiding American citizen with a business, and his wife has been living in the States for now 11 years, and she may have to go back home to where she's from.
But based on nothing that these people have done recently?
Nothing.
And generally in reaction to the verbiage that the United States
Correct.
is using?
Correct.
These governments are reacting?
Correct. And in a lot of, most cases, the government's already aware of this individual's registration status. They're already aware of it. People have traveled to countries, been let in, but made the statement that, well, what you ought to do is work to get off the registry, or tell your government to stop sending these nasty alerts, because we can't differentiate between an alert that should alert us of crime activity such as terror activity or drug activity or gang activity or something related to that, or someone who the government really considers a threat of committing a crime against a child. We can't distinguish that. So the countries, at least many countries, have determined the best thing for them to do is simply deport the individual. A normal immigration process, if I want to get a visa to travel to a country or to establish residency, they will check criminal backgrounds. You have to submit your financial history, and countries have an ability to vet you through that process. And through that vetting process, they can make a determination whether they will allow you in the country or not. This circumvents that vetting process, and is simply a statement saying that this person is a danger to your country and you should kick them out. Now, the U.S. government's stance is that they don't really know what the other country's response to the alert will be. However, the problem is that through the Interpol's alert systems and normal immigration alert systems, the alert systems are meant to send critical information to other countries. So this critically puts at risk the current alert system that's in place. Now again, I'm not an expert on how governments react to these alerts, but we do know directly from immigration departments and patrol officers that they consider these alerts critically, and that's a critical statement from the U.S. government to deport these individuals.
So, if I'm a concerned citizen, what's the best way for me to react to this?
I think the best thing, if you're the family member, first of all, as a registrant, you need to become very much informed of what's going on, and go to our website, contact one of our members, and get informed on what's happening with your travel plans. And just from a purely safety point of view, educate your family and your family loved ones. Contact us, and then when you decide which country you're going to travel to, make an informed decision whether it's safe to travel there. Then once IML is completely implemented, I would seriously consider whether doing international travel is something that you want to do or not, because if you have to put that unique identifier on your passport, our stance is that your entire family is at risk. And I cannot emphasize that more honestly. Second of all, if you do get into another country and you have to present your passport at hotels, etc., have another means of identification if possible. Because if you present that passport at a hotel and they become familiar with the identifier, that puts you and your family at physical risk. I cannot emphasize that more than I can. For the average American citizen, I would say contact your congressman, your congressperson and talk directly with them and educate them on the fact that this will do nothing to protect anyone overseas, and it's putting American citizens at risk as they travel. So as you travel overseas, any experiences that you have, please go to our website, get your information down, and we're collecting that information, collating it, and we're going to be having it for availability for further lawsuits or further actions. If someone's harmed overseas by the effect of this law, then we intend to make sure that we hold every single congressperson who voted for it responsible for that person's well-being.
This is being implemented under administrative law, is that correct?
Correct. We're supposed to get some vague messages from the State Department, but the State Department really has no clue of how they're going to implement it. We've got public statements and inferences that they're going to possibly revoke passports and then send you a letter saying that you have to get a new one. The problem is we have members who have passports who travel internationally for business, and now their businesses are put at risk. We have people who are residents who live in one country and also live in the United States, and their families live in and travel back and forth. So they're making plans to go travel to see family, or they're be traveling with their family, and now their entire travel plans are up in the air. We have one member, she's planning on getting married to her boyfriend in a foreign country, and now she's not sure. The entire wedding party is up in the air as to whether they can have the wedding. And we're talking, tens of thousands of dollars now are up in the air because the State Department, frankly, is incompetent of how they're planning on implementing this law. But to be honest with you, the message I got when I talked to congressional staffers about how they plan to implement it, they didn't care. They just didn't care. We pointed out to them that this is going to create a lot of chaos for people, not just the registrants, but their families who have legitimate travel plans, but they don't care. And the State Department at the moment, they don't seem to care. They're going for it with a haphazardly way. The message when I've talked to them on the phone is, well, we'll just get around to doing it, and you'll just have to sort it out when it happens.
Well, and part of the problem with this and other laws like it, if I understand correctly, is that the Congress passed a law, but they're counting on administrative
Correct.
agency in this case to really write how the law. I mean, the
Yeah.
agency is actually writing law without the authority to do it.
Correct. No guidance was given on what the unique identifier should look like, what it should say, how it should be implemented. No initial funds to implement the law. No understanding of how many people it would affect. Businesses, lives. There are retirees who live overseas who now their passport's going to be revoked. That's a legitimate. That's their only form of identification overseas. So they're going to create, in one moment, a bunch of undocumented aliens in other countries. We know the problems we have with undocumented aliens. They're going to create them overseas, American citizens. And guess what? These are people who are integrated into societies who are now instantly deportable. And that puts them and their families at risk. And our own government did it to American citizens. That's what's chilling. And remember, if they can do it to registrants, the U.S. government can do it to anybody. All we need is just another terrorist scare, and other American citizens living overseas, their passports are put at risk. And remember, if you give someone power, they're going to take it.
Give us your website one more time.
My website is registranttag.org.
Thank you.